All right, we are back. It is the Karen Hunter Show. We are here on Sirius XM. It is Motivational Monday. I'm committing myself to bringing brilliant people through, as I've always been for the last 8 years, but people who are building in the community. I want blueprints. Those of you who are listening, there's a lot of educators out there, and this man is a master educator. He is an incredible person. He is the CEO of the Center for Black Educator Development. Let me welcome to the show, Sharif El-Mekki. Hey.
Thanks so much. Hey, great to see y'all. Thanks for having me. Huge fan, huge fan.
Oh, well, listen, we are in this together. Like I feel like the mutual admiration society that we're building is around the work, right? It's not like, oh, I don't sing, dance, I ain't doing none of that. You're not singing and dancing. Maybe you can sing because a lot of y'all got multi-talents.
I can't. No. I'm just about this work. Yeah.
Yes, and that should be the fandom, right? Like, you're doing some things that are changing people's lives. I love you.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that should be it. So let's start there. Former principal, you'd have been in the system. I would call it the broken system that probably was invented to break us. You were there from the other side. Now you're over here building something. Is it something different that you're building, or is it an extension of what was broken?
Oh no, it's radically different. What we're building, and my friend Dr. Kosovo is saying we'll call it the Black teaching tradition, trying to recapture that Sankofa, looking back, fetching what has been lost, part of what has not been codified. I mean, although you doing a tremendous work of helping to make sure that it gets codified with your partnership with Dr. Greg Carr and others to make sure that we don't lose what people, how we know Black children and Black communities can be healed and supported. We know that the work that we're doing to rebuild this national Black teacher pipeline is something that, has always existed, really taking a look at what are the African people and what are our traditions and relationships between teaching and learning, scholars and scholarship, education and self-determination, and making sure that our youth are exposed to that in ways that many of them have not experienced as students. But in this intergenerational model that we're building, where these high school students and college students can teach first, second, and third graders, is a natural way that we learn anyway in our community. Everybody has a younger sibling, neighbor, cousin, aunt, uncle that they're learning from, but also pouring into, right? And so we're just honored to be able to engage high school youth, college youth, and teach them a little bit about the Black teaching tradition. Like, hey, forget what you heard. This is what Dr. Carter G. Woodson said about teaching and learning. Forget what you experience, or don't forget it, but actually do the 180 of that. Here's what Lucy Craft Laney said about building schools, leading classrooms. And here's the connection between education and racial justice, activism, and teaching Black children superbly.
So walk us through that bridge. All right. The day you walked out of a school as a principal and decided to do this.
Yeah. So, originally we piloted. I was a principal and we piloted because we had a couple of youth who were interested in teaching. And we were a 7 to 12 grade building. And we always had this learning institute for the incoming seventh graders. And we would ask our teachers and others to come and hold this learning institute, which was almost like 6 months. It was like half the sixth graders, their final sixth grade year, as they were coming to us in that summer, just so they could have orientation. They could start off, the fall, super well, super comfortable, part of the community. We were in the neighborhood in West Philadelphia, so it was a lot of siblings and all that kind of stuff. But at some point, I was teasing this young high schooler. She was catching a bus to go about an hour to go flip burgers at one of those chain restaurants in the suburban mall. And I'm teasing her. I'm like, you going a whole hour to go flip some burgers, girl? Can't you flip burgers in Philly? She's like, I actually don't want to flip burgers, El-Mekki. I want to be a teacher, but there's nowhere for me to go to learn how to teach. And that just punched me in the gut, because here I am leading a school and I'm just like, what do you mean there's nowhere to, I was like, you can ask one of this, like there are people inside the building who can teach you how to teach. She said, when I tell people that I want to be a teacher, people outside of school say, hey, you love kids, why don't you babysit mine? Oh. And she said, people inside the schools, when I tell them, they say, why don't you help me with my bulletin boards? And that was just such a gut punch that here we have this youth, this brilliant youth who says, I want to lead a classroom. And people are like, oh, file papers, do this, bulletin board, but not like the art and science and mindset and skill necessary to be an effective leader of a classroom, an effective leader of children in that community. And so we piloted that summer. We're just like, you know what, I'm going to find some money. We're going to pilot this. And instead of asking teachers to come and lead that Learning Institute for sixth graders, we asked high school and some of our alum. Hey, any of y'all who are interested in open to teaching, come join us and come teach the sixth graders about what you want to, do. And we were just tapping into what our alum were already doing. They were already popping in, stopping in, doing mentorship. Hey, can I help? Can I help? But we said, hey, let's systematize this and give them the opportunity to teach. And so that's what we've continued doing. So I left in 2019 after the successful pilot, and we learned from them. And we have the intergenerational model. We pulled from SNCC Freedom Schools, CDF, Children's Defense Fund Freedom Schools, the Black Panther Liberation Schools, as well as the Independent Black Schools movement, which I benefited from as an elementary school student. So pulling from all that, mix it up like some good old fashioned gumbo, and yeah.
We understood what you.
Yeah, I was about to say jumbo, and I was like gumbo. You know what I mean? It was just
jambalaya,
like,
gumbo, yes, the
so
shrimp, all of that.
First of all, this is something close to my heart because my daughter is an educator. So she's, and she's just starting.
Shout out to the educators.
Yes, right. I mean, it truly is a calling. What is it that the students, the younger students get? What do they get from learning from essentially peers? I mean, they're older, but they're, students as well. And what do the older students get outside of the actual learning, how to teach and how to do? What are they both getting?
The biggest thing is, sadly, what many of them may not necessarily experience is community. Like they see someone who feels that I'm responsible for you and for your learning. And you know what? I won't be successful unless you're successful. And you won't be successful unless I'm successful. And you know what? We're going to do this together, right? And so it's also just that near peer experience. But if you're in the first grade, my own daughters, my own personal biological youngest daughters are scholars in our program, right? And so I am able to kind of hear directly from them their love of their high school and college teacher. We call them, junior servant leaders and servant leader apprentices, these high school and college youth. They love them. Like, it's just like it's having an older sister or older brother who's, committing to showing them, teaching them, being there for them, but also having a cultural connection to understanding like, hey, we have a similar experience in this country and beyond. But then the older ones, what we see from them is this development of self-efficacy and confidence, because there's a pre-test and a post-test. But, there's nothing like you being a sophomore in high school and people telling you, all kind of anti-Black messages, all kind of anti-intellectual messages that they're sent. And many of them, unfortunately, may even digest it and internalize it. But when they see like, wait a minute, Sakina grew from here to here and I had a hand in that. Like, wait a minute, her positive racial identity has developed and improved and I had a hand in that. Like that is pretty powerful, where their sense of empowerment, but also their activism, because many of them are attracted to us because they're saying like, oh yeah, I'm interested in social racial justice. So we're like, okay, let's connect that to educational justice as well. And the purest form of activism is teaching Black children superbly. That starts to really invigorate them. And it's been powerful. It's been powerful.
You are powerful. Sharif El-Mekki is here, CEO of the Center for Black Educator Development. As you're talking, you can go to the centerblacked.org, www.thecenterblacked.org. I'm thinking about Fred Hampton, 24, 23, 22, 21 years old, 21 years old. I'm sorry, 21 years old, out there.
Leadership,
we don't have
right?
We don't have a rites of passage, but there's something to be said for that. I remember being in the fifth grade. I was very rambunctious. I guess you can talking in class, bored because, it's not challenged, blah, blah, blah. And my teacher didn't put me in the corner. She made me a hall monitor.
Yeah.
She made me a crossing guard. She didn't chastise me. She was like, here's some money, bring me my newspaper every day.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to go to the store on my way to school, and I would bring Miss Johnson her paper.
Responsibility.
How brilliant was she? Like, and it changed the trajectory of my classroom participation. Like, I felt like I owed it to, I'm going to get everyone safely across the street. I'm going to monitor the halls, and I'm bringing the teacher her paper. It definitely impacted. I was like, man, I think back now, it was the most brilliant thing, because you know how disruptive I probably was in class. I was disruptive. It changed everything. More, less punitive, more understanding.
Yeah.
That child is being, talkative because they don't have enough to do, or they don't feel connected to, because they've already read everything and they're just like, all right, I checked out.
Yeah. I mean, and when I think about like the leadership that you were given, but also poured into, like, a very different experience could have been like, just this constant, belittling, and undermining and trying to damage your dignity and humanity, right? Because that's what so many of our youth experience, right? And at some point, it's actually self-preservation to check out as a Black youth from all of this. And then later they're like, oh, why aren't they engaged? Like, you disengaged them. They were curious. Their eyes were lit up. They were interested. They wanted to learn. You can't, you can only stop them by treating them less than human, beings, right? Because if we know, the research shows that Black youth as early as 3 and 4 years old experience their teachers' racial biases. And if they experience that at 3 and 4, it doesn't stop when they're 7 and 8 or 16 and 17. If anything, it gets compounded. So at one point, when the Black youth don't have the language for, they're treating me as a subhuman, they might not have the language, but they have the experience. Their psyche, their soul knows, like, something is oppressive about this. I'm going to resist. I might not have all the tools and techniques, language to resist, but I know I am like shutting down, and I'm going to try to shut this down with my little tiny hands and small stature, but I am going to resist. That's problematic.
I grew up in a suburb of Sacramento, California. I never had a Black teacher. And I can remember in the 4th grade, we were all doing this exercise where we had to talk about our families and where they were from. And we got around to me, and of course we were out of time. And the teacher said, well, we all know Renee's family's from Africa, so we don't really need to go into, and I, I'm 10, I'm in the 4th grade, I'm 10. So I come home, and luckily I had a mother who was like, oh, hell no. And we marched right back up to the school. And she said, my daughter will have the same amount of time to talk about her family, who isn't just from Africa. We also happen to be Native American and so on. And luckily for me, I had her, but not everybody has, an Ann Seiler. So yeah.
And
absolutely.
You told her. Imagine how many Black youth suffer in silence. Where they feel like, the ramifications of me telling my family may be even greater. It's like when you sometimes don't want to talk about being bullied because they're like, oh, it may get worse. Yeah. Sometimes they're talking about the adult. They're not always talking about their peers. Sometimes they're thinking about the adults can treat me worse than what I'm being treated, and I may not have a escape hatch.
Wow. I played this clip of this young man. I don't know if you know him. His name is Oliver James. He is learning to read. He's 34 years old. Oh, yeah. You've seen this TikTok? He's a TikToker. He's got now, I think, nearly more than a couple of 100,000 people are following him. Every day he goes on, every week, and he's reading. And I just want to play a little bit of why he did not learn how to read when he was in school. Smith, are we ready? Do you have it? Okay. All right, play. I hope it's the same one.
I can't read, but that's all right. Because if you've been following along, we're on a journey to fix that. So a couple of people asked me, why didn't I learn how to read? And honestly, I didn't even know how to respond to this. So I asked my lady, and she was like, just be honest. So, to be honest, I didn't really ever think deep into it until like now when I put the video out that I can't read, and people kind of started to, respond to it and ask questions. And I started to think deep, and I realized, when I was young, I was abused. When I was in elementary school, I was in special education, and I didn't even like talking about that. So I never expressed, what they did, but they used to be able to like put their hands on us. And, I can go more into detail with that, but, it was really hard for me to, think about school, reading, anything had to do with school. When I was going to school thinking about like, what's going on? Like, truth, how can I get expelled? How can I get kicked out of this place? Most of the places. And, truth that puts you from one place to another. And most of them ain't better than the last one you were in. But yeah, there is some abuse in there. I thought I was the problem because as a kid, I thought I was grown. But I realize now I was the child. I was supposed to be a child. I was a problem, but I was a child. That's what a child does. You be a kid. But now that I'm an adult, I look at it, I'm like, no one should have been able to put their hands on me, regardless of what kind of child I was. But
Right.
Yeah.
if you want to hear more, just let me know. So,
Okay. So that's him.
Wow.
Yeah.
I grew up in an era where people could put their hands on you too. Nuns and stuff. I watched a nun beat up a child in class and humiliate children in class on a regular, had us petrified, that's not love. When I talked to Dr. Carr about how we used to learn multi-generationally around a tree, sharing stories and learning our history, I imagine that that's the way it should be. So when I think about what you're doing it, Dr. El-Mekki, you're doing it.
Yeah, and I also have to just, call out like the youth too, because, not only I love this intergenerational model. And, as I said, like we've learned that from we're just pulling into what is a natural way, what is an African way of being. And, I just want to share a couple things that I learned, or relearned, right? Because as adults, as human beings, we're sometimes stubborn, forgetful, and what I've relearned is, that we have to invite our youth to the table for them to help us solve problems that they had no hand in creating. Right. And so the destruction of the Black teacher pipeline, they didn't have a hand in that, but they have the wisdom and insight as well as the knowledge, because they are the ones most proximal to the problem of how to address it. One example of this is, we started our organization in 2019. As your listeners will know, a few months before the pandemic, here we are launching a small Black-led, founded nonprofit, which is already a precarious situation as in itself, but then right before the pandemic. And, our model with Freedom Schools, Literacy Academy being a part of teacher apprenticeship, summertime, after school, teacher academy during the day, where imagine Black Teaching 101. As a high school elective that you can take every year as you're matriculating through college, right? Then you graduate, you can come back and continue as an apprentice, a paid apprentice. But we were going to pause on all that with the 2020 because it was like, well, we can't do what we do virtually. Like we're in person, we're high five, we're hugging, we're having Harambe. And it was Black youth, high school students who said, oh, we can do this virtually. And my thing was like, no, everything I'm hearing on TV, articles that I'm reading is that you all hate virtual learning, that you won't show up, like it will be a disaster, like we can't. And they said, oh no, this is different though. We'll show up for this, and people will show up. And you know what? We listened, and I'm so grateful that we did, because I was literally about like, hey, we're just going to pause. We'll send them articles to read. They're like, no, we want to teach first, second, and third graders as our normal product, and we're going to do it virtually. And it reminded me that you can build community wherever, as long as you have the mindset to do it, as long as you have love and a community-based orientation, a servant leadership, anchor, then you're able to do it, right? And so we did it, and we went from having 2 sites in person in Philly that everybody paused around the globe, paused that, and then ended up having 15 states represented in our Freedom Schools.
Wow.
As far away as California. And they're doing Harambe, they're doing reading, they're teaching and learning. And I'm just like, and the outcomes were also impressive. Like, so we're talking about like, oh, people lost this and lost that. We're like, no, not these youth. Positive racial identity, check. Literacy, check, right? And then the other thing that they taught me was they were, part of their learning how to be a teacher, they have to do an educational activism project. And we're always, doing focus groups, trying to learn from them. Hey, give me you're wise. I don't care if you're a teenager, you're wise, share it, because they don't always look at what they know and what they've experienced as wisdom. It's just like, no, you guys you're the expert on your lived experience. And that was integral about informing us on how to create a program for your peers. And as we continue to grow and expand around the country. And so they came up with a campaign. #We need Black teachers.
Oh.
And I was like, wait a minute, you're a teenager. Aren't you supposed to have some smoke screen, some TikTok, some of this, some of that, some rap, just something? And they said, no, we don't want to distract from our rallying cry and our demand. We need Black teachers. They're like, we don't want anybody distracted by anything. That's why we're not dancing. We're not doing it. We're just telling them straight. #We need Black teachers. And we're just like, oh my gosh, like that's brilliant, right? Like that's brilliant. Like we just actually helped them. So we just started helping them amplify it, right? And now we have folks all around the country who are sharing why we need Black teachers and what their experience has been with having Black teachers and why they want more Black teachers. They're like, this is our rallying cry and demand. And we're like, you know what? This is the genius that you all that we always need access to. So keep stuff, help us stay close to you and stay close to us as we go on this journey together to rebuild a national Black teacher pipeline.